Have you ever found yourself completely paralyzed by your own brilliant mind, aggressively analyzing every single possible outcome, frantically mapping out every potential disaster, and desperately waiting for the absolute perfect moment, only to realize that while you were entirely busy thinking, your entire life just violently passed you by? We falsely convince ourselves that obsessively overanalyzing a situation is a highly productive, incredibly responsible form of problem solving. But the terrifying, dark psychological reality is that overthinking is an aggressive, invisible disease that completely murders your potential and secretly steals the only real power you actually possess, the ability to take immediate action. Before we dive into today's life-changing lesson on the incredibly dangerous, completely devastating psychological trap of severe overthinking, please take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you these powerful stories. In the highly advanced, deeply intellectual capital of a vast ancient empire, there lived an incredibly brilliant, highly educated young strategist named Ilara, who possessed an undeniable once-in-a-generation genius for deeply predicting massive political and economic trends. Ilara had spent her entire youth locked away in a dark, dusty library, aggressively devouring thousands of heavy books on global trade, desperately mapping out the exact flawless route to becoming the wealthiest, most incredibly powerful merchant in the entire kingdom. But Ilara was deeply infected by a highly toxic, completely paralyzing psychological virus. She absolutely refused to take a single practical step into the real world until she had completely eliminated every single fraction of a percent of potential risk from her massive, highly detailed plans. When a rare, highly lucrative opportunity arose to purchase a massive fleet of spice ships at a heavily discounted price, Ilara immediately panicked, frantically locking herself in her room for 3 agonizing weeks to desperately calculate the exact probability of ocean storms, pirate attacks, and fluctuating market prices. She aggressively drew hundreds of complex, highly intricate charts on her walls, violently debating with herself late into the freezing night, entirely convinced that if she just thought about it hard enough, she could completely guarantee a flawless, utterly invincible outcome. But while Ilara was deeply drowning in her own brilliant, chaotic mind, a completely uneducated, highly impulsive, incredibly average street merchant named Kale simply borrowed a small pouch of gold, immediately bought the ships without a second thought, and aggressively set sail the very next morning. By the time Ilara finally emerged from her dark, dusty room, proudly holding the absolute perfect, mathematically flawless blueprint that completely eliminated all risk, she walked down to the docks only to see Kale's massive fleet returning, heavily overflowing with incredibly expensive, priceless cargo. Completely crushed, deeply humiliated, and utterly paralyzed by the massive, painful reality of her own missed opportunity, Ilara watched in absolute horror as the completely average, uneducated man instantly became the wealthiest, most highly respected noble in the entire city. Desperate for answers and heavily burdened by her own massive intellect, Ilara traveled to the high, freezing mountains to seek the harsh, unfiltered wisdom of an ancient, highly feared Stoic master who lived completely alone in the brutal, unforgiving elements. The old master, a man who survived by actively hunting in the freezing snow, listened silently as Ilara frantically poured out her tragic story, aggressively explaining how her incredibly brilliant, highly calculated plans were completely ruined by a foolish, impulsive amateur who got incredibly lucky. You are entirely blinded by the massive, arrogant illusion that your highly advanced intellect can somehow completely control the natural, deeply chaotic universe. The old master growled with a terrifying, heavy voice that completely pierced the freezing wind. He brutally explained that a highly average man violently swinging a dull, heavy sword in the actual arena will absolutely always defeat the brilliant, highly educated scholar who is safely sitting in the crowd, desperately overthinking the perfect mathematical angle of the strike. Overthinking is not a highly advanced form of strategic preparation. It is a deeply cowardly, highly submissive psychological defense mechanism that your fragile ego actively uses to completely protect you from the terrifying, incredibly vulnerable reality of potential failure. When you aggressively analyze every single possible negative outcome, you are actively hallucinating a massive, entirely fake future that does not actually exist, completely draining your highly premium essential daily energy on deeply terrifying ghosts that you actively invented in your own mind. Elara fell to her freezing knees, completely shattered by the massive, incredibly painful psychological realization that her intense, desperate need for absolute certainty was the exact toxic chain actively holding her back from her own massive, undeniable destiny. This dark, incredibly aggressive psychological story holds an absolutely urgent, deeply life-altering truth for anyone who is currently trapped in the highly toxic, completely exhausting cycle of deeply overanalyzing their relationships, fiercely debating their career choices, and desperately waiting for the perfect time to start. You must fundamentally understand that the highly arrogant, deeply insecure part of your brain will always aggressively demand more information, desperately convincing you that just one more day of planning will finally make you completely immune to the brutal, chaotic unpredictability of real life. But the terrifying, dark psychological reality is that the absolute perfect moment is a highly dangerous, completely fictional myth, and clarity does not actually come from sitting in a dark room, violently thinking. Clarity only aggressively arrives through the messy, highly imperfect process of taking immediate, massive action. When you constantly heavily debate whether to send that important message, fiercely overanalyze what that person truly meant, or desperately wait until you feel completely ready to launch your business, you are actively committing psychological suicide by entirely bleeding out your own massive potential. Human beings are biologically hardwired to deeply respect highly decisive, entirely unbothered individuals who possess the cold, terrifying courage to boldly step entirely alone into the dark, terrifying unknown, completely regardless of the heavy, toxic public backlash or the massive potential for failure. True, undeniable power is completely recognizing that you are the absolute, ultimate master of your own incredible momentum, and absolutely refusing to ever hand your incredibly expensive, heavy iron steering wheel over to the highly paranoid, deeply fearful voice inside your own head. Stop desperately begging for a highly conditional, completely fake sense of perfect security in a world that is fundamentally, brutally chaotic, and actively accept that you will absolutely make massive, incredibly painful mistakes no matter how perfectly you desperately plan. The exact moment you boldly decide to completely stop desperately seeking the absolute perfect route and simply, aggressively take the highly imperfect first step is the exact moment you violently reclaim the massive, undeniable steering wheel of your own incredible, highly unstoppable destiny. You must eagerly learn to completely fall in love with the highly intimidating, absolutely liberating power of being entirely in motion, violently trusting your own incredible, highly adaptive ability to quickly figure things out when they inevitably go entirely wrong. Let the highly anxious, deeply paralyzed crowd violently complain about the massive risks. Let them loudly gossip about your intense, unapologetic boldness, and let them desperately create entirely fake, terrifying scenarios to rapidly soothe their own massive, unhealed, deep internal trauma. While they are entirely obsessed with angrily trying to forcefully predict the future, you will be deeply focused on aggressively building your own massive, undeniably brilliant, highly untouchable reality in the completely messy, chaotic present moment. Take a massive, incredibly deep breath today. Forcefully rip the heavy pen out of the dirty hands of your own deep anxiety. Completely drop the heavy, exhausting burden of the desperate perfectionist, and actively step into the highly intimidating, deeply authentic power of your own raw momentum. Master the terrifying, completely invincible art of total emotional detachment from absolute certainty. Strictly refuse to negotiate your immense, unique worth with your own deep fears, and aggressively protect the sharp, beautiful edge of your incredibly decisive nature. Do not ever desperately water down your incredibly powerful, highly potent execution just because a highly arrogant, deeply fearful part of your brain is completely unable to comfortably accept the massive, terrifying reality of totally unknown outcomes. Your incredibly unapologetic, deeply authentic ability to aggressively act without absolutely knowing the future is your absolute greatest, most heavily guarded psychological weapon. Aggressively keep it highly active, violently keep it completely uncompromising, and absolutely never be afraid to fiercely use it to protect your own massive progress. When you finally completely stop caring if every single tiny detail is perfectly aligned before you move, you violently open the heavy doors to a massive, beautifully bright future filled with the absolute, highly elevated success that is strictly reserved for those who actually enter the arena. Reclaim your absolute power today. Completely ignore the desperate, pathetic screams of your own deep overthinking, and confidently execute the massively successful, deeply peaceful reality that perfectly aligns with your own undeniable soul. Stay completely cold to the cheap, toxic manipulation of your own deep doubts. Stay incredibly focused on your own massive growth, and let your absolute, terrifying momentum be the loudest, most devastating statement you ever actually make. You were absolutely not put on this highly competitive, deeply chaotic earth to safely hide in the dark, violently debating every single possible move. You were placed here to aggressively build a massive, absolutely undeniable legacy by boldly walking completely into the terrifying fire. Stop freely giving away highly expensive, incredibly vital pieces of your own beautiful timeline just to temporarily satisfy the endless, highly toxic hunger of a fearful mind that will never actually be perfectly secure. Stand incredibly firm in your own massive power. Fiercely defend your own brilliant ability to adapt, and absolutely never apologize for refusing to actively destroy yourself by perfectly waiting for a completely flawless tomorrow that will never actually arrive. Embrace the glorious, highly intimidating momentum of the true, undeniable master, entirely detached from the cheap, paralyzing illusion of perfect planning, and watch the entire world aggressively bend to respect your unshakable, highly decisive action. If you found true value in this dark, psychological lesson and learned something incredibly important about the true, devastating price of deep overthinking today, please hit that like button, leave a comment below about your own journey, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life lessons.